Okay, well, I want to welcome everyone, and I want to give a special welcome to Dr. Pittenger. David Pittenger is an experimental psychologist by training and has studied such things as the validity of personality tests, operant and classical conditioning phenomenon, and perception. He started his career at Marietta College as the chair of the Department of Psychology. During the next 10 years, he hired a new faculty and greatly increased the number of students majoring in psychology. In 2000, David moved to Chattanooga, where he is also a department chair and then associate provost at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. His next move, a big step up, as he describes it, was coming to Marshall as the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. During his work as Dean, he assisted with the creation of the Simon Perry Center for Constitutional Democracy and created the Amicus Curiae Lecture Series and the Daniel Hanlon's Constitution Essay Contest. With the retirement of two senior administrators, David then became the Associate Vice President for Outreach and Continual
See if I can do it on TV.
And Dean of the Graduate College. He is currently overseeing the creation of Marshall University's new flight school to be housed at Yeager Airport and the Aviation Maintenance Technician's degree to be housed at Tri-State Airport. David has a lifelong passion for fine art. For the past 2 years, he has dedicated himself to exploring photography as a means to express himself. The work he will present today spans several years as he has traveled across our great state in his attempt to document and understand the Calvary sites created by Bernard Coffindaffer. And Dr. Pittenger, there was a typo, is it 2 years or 10 years you have dedicated yourself?
Well, I've been doing photography for about 10 years, and it's probably this project I've been doing for the past 3 years or so.
Okay, all right. Well, and we're just so excited to have Dr. Pittenger, and Dr. Pittenger is also my immediate supervisor, and he is my go-to for the LLP, and I'm so thankful to work with Dr. Pittenger. It is my privilege to work with Dr. Pittenger and this group. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. David Pittenger.
Well, good morning. Thank you all for coming out today and sharing with me some of my experiences that I've had while I've been living in West Virginia. And of course, the computer is not quite as there we go. So anyway, again, also thank you very much for being a part of this important group. A shout out to the Muffsons who were instrumental in goading us in the right direction to start the program. It's, I think, a real asset to the community, and I'm proud to be associated with this organization. So let's begin with why we're here today. This is Bernard Coffindaffer. He was born in 1925 in Nicholas County. Very bright young man, excelled in school, and in fact graduated from high school at 15. He was a little conservative when he reported his age at the start of World War II. It was probably 2 years too young to join the Marines, but they accepted his application. He spent most of the war in the Pacific Theater, and then returned home, and thanks to the GI Bill, studied business at the Morris Harvey College, now the University of Charleston. When he graduated, he started a successful business in the coal industry, and that's where he made his millions. As he tells the story, in the very early 1980s, he had an epiphany where he heard a divine voice directing him to build the Calvary sites throughout West Virginia and the country. So with that, he sold all of his business interests, which probably yielded, this is $1980, a little over $3 million. He's then started a campaign contacting individuals, churches, and the like, asking for people to allow him to erect the Calvary scenes on their property, and a lot of people did. When I was doing this project, I was driving around, and I'm standing out in the street doing shooting of the crosses, and the fella comes out and says, "What are you doing?" I'm taking pictures of the crosses, and I'm really interested. And then he smiled and he said, "Yeah, I can remember. I was probably, this tall, and my grandparents were having the crosses installed, and that was their proudest day." So most of us have seen these along the highway. And I think my particular story is I did not see them until I moved to Marietta in 1990. And I thought, well, that's rather interesting. Really didn't think all that much of them. My wife and I used them to distract our easily bored children on long drives on who could spot the crosses fastest. I then, of course, as you know, I moved to Chattanooga, where although the claim is Tennessee is the buckle of the Bible Belt, I really didn't see the crosses there. Then, when I returned, of course, to Huntington, I began to see them again. So one day I was driving home from Charleston on 64, and no great surprise, there was an accident along the way, and I was stopped at this site, which is very close to the Milton exit. So what do you do when you're stopped with nothing to do and there's nothing really interesting on the radio? You begin to look around. And I began to look at the scene and began to ask myself, why? Why are these crosses here? What is the scene telling me? Obviously, it's a pasture. It's a well mowed and maintained pasture. It's not being used for livestock or for grain. And then I've seen it before. The gate is perpetually open. And the more I began to look at the crosses, the more I began to say, this is somebody who is communicating with us, someone who is trying to tell a story. It's trying to draw our attention to a lot of things. So I decided then I might do a photo study of the crosses. Fortunately, when Mr. Coffindaffer died, fortunately, he saved all of his records. Those are preserved by a group called Crosses Across America. And it has cryptic notes about where each of the crosses can be found. Some of the descriptions are spot on. At exit 23 on interstate such and such, you go there, wonderful. Others are a tad bit vague. North of Eleanor on Route 2, just south of the Evergreen Hotel. I spent a day driving north and south on Route 2. I found Eleanor easily enough, but I could never find the Evergreen Hotel or the crosses. So this has been a rather interesting journey for me. What I'd like to do is to talk about the crosses as a concept of redemption. One, how people perceive the cross, Mr. Coffindaffer's legacy, and perhaps a little bit of my own legacy in that this project has really changed a lot of my preconceived notions of many things. So let's begin. So obviously, what does it mean to be redeemed? It means a relief from something, to be freed, to overcome some particular type of strife. We also talk about as a way of restoring or repairing, and oftentimes we talk about an individual having redeeming qualities that are brought out. And these are the sorts of things, themes that I like to pursue in my own photography. I think one of the first things that we have to do is deal with the persistence of stereotypes of what it means to live in Appalachia more broadly and what it means to live in West Virginia. So the following quote is from a scholar from North Carolina, publishing his book on the history of Appalachia from the University of North Carolina Press. And I'll allow you to read this on your own. I hope you can see the full quotation. Oops, sorry about that. Should I go to the next page? So in a rather complex sentence, we are reduced to gross stereotypes. Everyone lives in a mobile home. Men are always outdoors hunting things, and women are always glad to have a mobile home because they get the best appliances. I'm glad that that sentence encapsulates the 1.8 million people who live in this country. And it's, I think, something that unfortunately we always have to battle to overcome. I'm a proud son, now a proud son of West Virginia, and want to move on beyond these simplicities. But sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. And the editor responds. I had not known that the raising of various objects would destroy the economy of the state. But I think these are some of the sorts of things that, for me, are challenges that need to be examined. And as you'll see, I disagree with her assessment that somehow the crosses disrupt what we see in our area. So again, some obvious things. Why do we have the crosses? Well, this is what's called a wordle. I took all of the text from the four Gospels, or the Gospels, and the computer then generates the words in terms of how frequently they're presented. So obviously, this is Mr. Coffindaffer's goal. He wants to make people aware of the gospel. He wants people to know of the redemption that the Christian belief provides. And this is, I believe, a quote from Luke. I mean, essentially, I think this is the motivation for Mr. Coffindaffer raising the crosses. So in 1984, this became the first installation. Flatwoods is, for all practical purposes, the epicenter of the state. These crosses oversee the Route 74, and so it's easy to see, and I think it meets his mission of trying to use the crosses as a form of advertising. And as we move along, many of you have seen these installations, usually from the highway. Not quite sure he had intended to share his advertising space with these sorts of activities. But they are definitely a ubiquitous part of our territory, of our state, and do represent his quest for advertising. As I moved through this project, I discovered that the vast majority of the crosses that I was finding are in fact in extremely remote areas, well off the beaten path. So here on Route 60 between Charleston and Huntington, a small hillside, and the crosses obviously in the background. In northeastern West Virginia, again, a very remote part of the state, but again, someone expressing themselves clearly. This is near Athens, again on the interstate, part of a homestead. And another one along a highway. And not too, again, on the interstate on 64, just as you cross into to Putnam County, But again, a lot of these end up being on personal property. One of the things that is particularly interesting is that if you look carefully at this picture, you see in the lower right foreground a nice house. And just beyond that, there looks like a large garden. And then if you look real carefully further on back, you'll see that there's a family plot. This is a small family graveyard. And one of the things that, having been raised in the Northeast, all I knew was that cemeteries and graveyards were either at churches or municipal or for-profit areas. What I discovered is that there are a large number of private cemeteries in the state, and many of these are also the site of the crosses. This is not far from Princeton, West Virginia. It was a productive day for me as it was foggy, which is an aesthetic that I particularly enjoy. But again, what we see here is probably 5 or 6 generations of a family in a family graveyard, and a symbol of their belief. This is an interesting graveyard. This is as you're driving into the Point or the Eleanor Point Pleasant area. It's a very large cemetery that has both human as well as their pets buried together. Again, another family graveyard in again a very remote part of the state. So the question is, are they art? Are they a form of public art? As you'll see, I think they are, and here we go. So let's begin by putting these in context. If you've driven north or south through the northern border of Tennessee, you may have seen this scene. In Tennessee, in the deeper south, there's a fellow who is erecting these extremely large crucifixes. Here, obviously, I think he's trying to make a point. It's interesting. And here's another one of the same crosses next to a church. Now, it has obvious religious symbolism, but I really don't find this cross all that appealing as a piece of art. I mean, essentially, it is a steel object made, with the sort of things that you would use for the siding of a building. Its size, while impressive, seems to diminish other things around it. You can see the church in the background is not that far away, and yet is dwarfed by the object. And then again, having grown up in the Northeast, we always called these either the poor man's grotto or the bathtub Mary. So it was very common to take the old cast iron tub, partially submerge it into the ground, and then put in a little statue. Cute, kind of tchotchke. And then there are other sorts of things. And so if we want to define all of this as art, then we have defined it so that anything that exists can be artistic. I think it's an interesting bit of cultural phenomenon, but I wouldn't want to live across the street of this same. So let's look at my perspective. Here is one very near Point Pleasant. Again, the day benefited me in terms of having some fog. For me, the scale of the crosses is just right. they're easy. I see them, I look at them, I can contemplate them, and they are observable, but they don't overwhelm the particular situation. The other is that, and again, this is why I think it's a form of public art, is that the crosses then draw my attention not only to themselves, but to the immediate area. When I was doing this photograph, getting it set up, immediately I started hearing, remembering the Burl Ives cover of the folk song. This train is bound for glory. And here I'm playing a little Ansel Adams, again, early in the morning during the sunrise. An otherwise nondescript hill, but it caused me to stop and investigate, look at the story that's being told in the scenery. And moving on, here's another. For me, this picture is an extremely interesting story for several parts. First of all, consider where this is. This is again on 64 after you go further on beyond Charleston. This is a tall hill of solid rock, and there's no access road. These are very, very large utility poles that the electric company, telephone company use. So they're not light. They're very long, and so it's not like going to Lowe's and getting a 4x4 post, digging a shallow hole in the ground and dumping in a couple of bags of Quikrete. Someone had to go in deeply into the mountainside in order to be able to have the pole stand erect. One of the other interesting things about the crosses is that they all have the extremely large stakes at the points of the cross where the hands and ankles would have been bound. Again, if I were driving by, I'd say, oh, that's a nice church, probably Methodist. But when I saw the crosses, it caused me to stop and think more about what was going on at the church. This is on Kanawha River, just above the Kanawha Falls, obviously in the autumn. When he put these up, he probably violated a whole bunch of regulations for the intercoastal water system and the like. But if you're familiar with this area, to the far left of the scene, there's another island in which there's a sort of a camper that a person is using as a home. This is an interesting scene. One, it's I shot it using an infrared camera. This is an interesting scene in that it was originally just set up as a sort of an open area. Somebody, obviously it's private property, someone owns it. And then someone later installed a little podium so that there could be impromptu meetings. Yes, when you fall into the rabbit hole of taking photographs, you have to buy every lens gadget possible. Here I'm using an 8mm lens to my advantage, I hope. A scene in Wayne County. And that pretty much brings me to the end of my my formal presentation. I had been at this site probably working it for about 3 hours trying to get the right picture. and I just couldn't. I was standing on the top of a hill trying to get as close to the crosses without violating trespassing laws, trying to, in fact, again, these crosses are in a family plot, and I just could not get the photograph that I wanted. But when I sat down in my car and got ready to go, as always, I always check my mirrors before I start driving, and I thought, there's my photograph. So with that, thank you for your kind patience. I'd be glad to answer any questions or hear comments that you might have.
So
I have a question.
David, how heavy is each of those crosses, and how did Coffindaffer put them up himself?
Well, he had I don't know how heavy they are. Let's say that what I've seen is that he did employ a crane to lift many of them, and he also had a 3-person crew that would go out and install it. And one person wrote, she called him in the morning and said, yes, I'd love to have the crosses on our property. And he showed up in around 1 in the afternoon. So anyway, the crew would have all of the tools necessary to burrow into the ground and raise them. And for the most part, the ones that are still standing are in relatively good condition. Some have sagged a little bit here or there, but haven't we all after 40, 50 years?
Dr. Pittenger, this is Bill Wilson.
Yes.
A couple of observations and a question. He was a licensed United Methodist minister.
That's correct.
In his later years, and was always kind of on the edge, so to speak, with the denomination, you know, in terms of, and which we always, for a lot of people, a lot of folks tend to think that it was, you know, kind of, it was, that was his underlying spirit of, you know, definitely of wanting to do this. And has there been, and in your interest in this, you mentioned some of the, has there been anybody that's taken this on to write about that whole experience of, you know, like what you just said around the mechanics of it and how he proceeded? You said, you have clarify, you said there were papers that were left with the, what was it? The crosses across America.
Right.
Have they put together something like that, or?
They have a web page. It doesn't have much. A couple of pictures of Mr. Coffindaffer, and then links to PDFs of the. Someone transcribed his notes, and so they have PDFs of that. I did put together a book. It's just a short book of the photographs, a lot of that you've seen here and more. And I did write a couple of essays, one, a more thoroughgoing history of Mr. Coffindaffer, and then a longer essay on why I believe they do represent a form of public art. The books are available at the Red Caboose if you're interested.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
And you know, your question, I think there is a public art dimension of this that, and it has such, you know, such emotional kind of a wide variety of emotions, as certainly with around what people think of in terms of seeing the 3 crosses emotionally, religiously, and then also the same way in which just the placement of them. You've just done a beautiful job with your photography. Thank you.
Well, thanks. And really, I see it as really a form of photographic anthropology. You know, in that the crosses are more than just a sense of devotion to Christianity. For me, the fact that so many of them are in family plots, I think speaks volume to the natives who live here, the people who've lived here for generations. For them, it's not property; it's land. And this is where, and people, and everyone will say, "This is where my people are from." And so I think, again, the crosses represent that sense of identity. Yes, Coffindaffer was an iconoclast, and these things are iconoclastic to some extent. But, you know, I can drive through any town and I can be 90% accurate of what denomination a church building is just by looking at its architecture. And again, this is just another form of expression. And as I said before, public art is to draw attention not only to the object, but to the space around it.
Yeah, that was very helpful, your comment on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How many installations were there all together at, I guess you'd say, the height of them?
Supposedly there are about 350 in West Virginia. I've successfully found about 65. Most of them end up being serendipitous. But nationally, according to the records, there's probably 1,200 across the United States.
What other states have a large collection of them?
It varies. Virginia, Ohio, parts of Pennsylvania. Essentially, if you follow the Appalachian counties, you see a lot of them represented there. But there is supposedly one or two in Maine and a few out in the West. But the vast majority are in the Appalachian, Alabama, of course, Mississippi.
I found an article while you were speaking, Dr. Pittenger, and it's from the West Virginia Explorer, and it says crosses across America, and that's the headquarters, correct?
Correct.
Headquartered in Vicksburg, Mississippi, was established in 1999 to locate and restore the crosses. The Coffindaffer left no trust for their upkeep. The organization hopes to plant clusters of crosses you might know all this, I'm just sharing this with the group, every 50 miles along both sides of the 45,000 miles of interstate and highways in the U.S., proceed to 4-lane highways, and then move into Mexico and Canada. The new crosses are of a lighter plastic material that can withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds.
Yeah.
So he left quite a legacy.
Yeah, a couple of points. I think their aspirations are far beyond what they're capable of doing. I think most of the crosses that I've seen have the original paint. Only one or two have since been repainted. One of the tragedies about Mr. Coffindaffer is that when he started this project, he essentially put all of his monies into the project, and he died in the late 1980s of a heart attack. I did have the good fortune of meeting his youngest daughter and widow, and they live in Charleston. I'd given a presentation at Bridge Valley, and they were kind enough to join me. Unfortunately, when he died, he essentially left his family destitute, and so his widow has to live with his daughter in order to make ends meet. And I have tried reaching out to other members of the family, and essentially folks are fairly disaffected. It's a family that's been rendered consequence of his effort.
So David, it's Mario Upson. I don't know whether he saw this as public art. You have done a wonderful job photographing, especially in fog and more black and white and the infrared, all lend a certain amount of mystery to the three crosses wherever they were placed. But I wonder whether, as he was a certified minister, whether or not this wasn't a way of introducing his religion around the countryside in the hopes that people might recognize this as a religious symbol and go to church more or join a church or find out his religion and wonder whether they wouldn't want to be in that religion.
Yeah, he was very clear. He he was a businessman, and he knew that in order to sell things, he had to advertise. And so he was rather unabashed that the crosses were to remind people of what happened at Calvary and their meaning. Hate to use the metaphor, but it seems appropriate. To me, putting these up in West Virginia is kind of like preaching to the choir. You know, the state has a very, very long tradition of Calvinistic and similar sorts of religious attitude. But be that as it may, yes, he wanted to beat the drum loudly that that Christianity was something that people should follow. Do want to thank you for your comment about the photographs. When I started this and I saw that there were 300 installations, I thought, oh golly, I'm going to end up with 300 snapshots of an identical scene. And you know that a snapshot is a derogatory term for a photographer. So I decided when I started the project that I had to treat each installation as if it was a portrait of a person, and that what I needed to do was, as I was taking a picture of a person, I try to capture the essence of the individual, or in this case, the site.
They were very well done.
Thank you.
So are these, go ahead.
Oh, this is
Jane
Bill
McKee.
again. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is Jane McKee. I just wanted to make a comment because I think your photographs are outstanding. And what came to mind is I'm not sure the crosses themselves I would consider art, a religious symbol, yes, but your photographs make them art.
Mm-hmm.
They are just stunning, and every photograph actually says something a little different to me. Just a beautiful presentation. I'm so glad that Elizabeth had you. That's great.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, this is Bill Wilson. That's what I was going to just raise the question, because I'm intrigued by the fact that and maybe I have a bias because I knew him. I was, around him, and the crosses and the reason him putting them there, and of course, like you've expressed so well, he was a businessman and at the same time became a licensed pastor, and he was one of our part-time pastors, so he had a bivocational kind of relationship, but you're intriguing to say isn't it amazing that the mindset of this person who did this, who was about this and had this vision or whatever, that the art of it, the public art, is what is around it, and the setting and what it draws out of anybody, like what Jane just said. I mean, how each setting is so different, and what emotions it brings, or what inspiration, and there are. I mean, I've talked with some people who get angry at it, or angry about it, like you expressed, David, about the people who were saying, it being where it is, and that.
There are some people who absolutely detest them because the cross is too closely associated with the Ku Klux Klan, and there are others. A friend of mine who is a minister refuses to use the cross either as a jewelry or on her robes, because she doesn't want to be reminded of the brutality of Jesus's death, and so wants to focus on other matters. One person also reminded me that the cross didn't really become a religious symbol until about 400 or 500 AD, long after Christ, and with the creation of more formal religions. So, in a sense too, the cross has a lot of meaning for different people, and again, the fact that it evokes those sorts of reactions is again speaks to it as a potential object of art.
One of the things I find fascinating was your information about the widow living in poverty. And so the Coffindaffer was both a very religious person and a businessman. I would have thought that he would have been concerned about his family, and that would have provided with that for them in a way that they wouldn't suffer. So I find it sort of incongruous. I don't know how others might see that.
The daughter didn't go into a lot of details, but she did suggest that her father in his later years did have a number of specific challenges, in that perhaps his decisions weren't as well informed as we would have hoped.
Okay.
So he did not pay people to put these on their property.
Correct. People
He was
volunteered the land, and he provided the materials and installation.
So he did. So that he probably paid people. Then, do you think? I'm trying to figure out what happened to all his millions.
Well, these aren't these aren't cheap.
Right.
They're big spruce poles that the utilities use. And then he was paying the installers. He had to have the equipment and the like. So yeah, essentially he burned through over $3 million installing these.
Do you have dimensions of the sizes?
No, they're exceptionally tall. I would say, I'm guessing, I would guess that the center pole is probably 30 feet tall.
Wow.
And they're very round. I mean, well, if you just go up to a telephone pole, you'll get a sense of what the size is.
So so there's no video or photographs from others of them being installed that you've come across?
There's a if you go one of the CBS morning shows in the mid 80s did a video on him. It's about 2 or 3 minutes. It's really a well done, balanced presentation. I forget the name of the show. It's always something Sunday morning or Sunday Today or whatever. But if you do look, there is a nice video. Where they show.
I believe it's CBS Sunday Morning as well.
Thank you.
Well, I want to just echo what everyone else has said. Your photographs are truly art. I mean, wow, they're beautiful. All the different ways you've captured these crosses. It's just outstanding.
Well, thank you.
This is Jane McKee again. I wanted to ask you, you said that he heard a divine voice and that told him to do this. Was there any evidence that later in his life he heard voices again?
Not that I've read or reported.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he did when he was being interviewed by the Washington Post. This would have been much later. He only made reference to the soul epiphany that he had.
So he just felt led, a divine type.
Yeah, I'm going to read from the quote that I have in my book. I didn't see a spirit. I heard the authority of a voice of God. It was language, but no way human voice. My wife watched me copy it down at 3 o'clock in the morning. And then, yeah, and so that's the only reference that I can find about that epiphany or any others.
Maybe Dr. Wilson can enlighten us on the type of epiphany he received from.
Well, that's well, I was going to say that's yeah. I mean, it's congruent with now I don't going to sound callous when I say this, but a style of anybody who's in and I love the way Dr. Pittenger is framing this in terms of Appalachian culture. Particularly, we have had a history as Methodists where people will have this personal sense of calling, which is why you sense in several denominations in Appalachia, people who have, of course, felt called of God to be preachers to be, to preach the gospel, and what they end up, and that's hearing whatever to them is hearing God call them, or a sense of your calling. And I could see very clearly where Coffindaffer, just a part of his religious experience, had this vision. I mean, because I remember there were conversations around during that period of time with him as a licensed pastor as to what this was meaning and what this was all about.
To the extent his calling, he felt, to the extent that he did use all the resources that he had, I guess he had such a conviction about this. Yeah.
That's a, but I'm just trying to, it seems a kind of a, it's not an unusual, well, other than, it's not an unusual epiphany, for example. Right. It's not an unusual that persons would feel this sense of calling that I need to do this, or I need to do that. And he's already within the kind of cultural realm and the whole social psychology of it, that he's already in a setting where he's been called to, out of a businessman, to be a minister, a preacher, a pastor.
Are there any more questions for Dr. Pittenger? Dr. Pittenger, what is the name of your book?
It is Mr. Coffindaffer's Crosses, a study of public art. And like I said, it's available at the Red Caboose.
Okay.
Dr. Pittenger, I wanted to thank you for the comment about Musson's being part of the start of the lifelong learning, but also the Tuma. Dr. Tuma were very involved in this. And it's just been great to have Elizabeth now taking over and leading us in the fact that we can get on even in this COVID kind of world and still continue to do the lifelong learning. I think it's really fantastic, and thank you for giving us a really informative presentation from our safe spaces in our homes.
Well, I appreciate that. Mine is a really easy job. I hire competent people, I give them the reins, and then sit back and cheer at every success that they have. Susan really, when this became available, I did have an epiphany. Susan's name popped in my head, and I said,
I'm
yes.
Elizabeth.
I'm sorry.
He calls me Susan all the time. This is so cute.
Sorry.
We'll add an extra name.
Yeah.
You should talk to my wife sometimes. No, Elizabeth popped to my top of my head, and so it's really worked out well. I'm looking forward to the point where we can get back in person, even though the state is now allowing people to assemble with 100 people or more. I'm very anxious about the venues that are available. If the egress to get in and out is broad enough so that you don't have stagnant air that's contaminated, people have to walk through. We still need to have the social distances. We still have to have the masks and the like. So my feeling is we have speed limits. We're required to maintain our vehicles, and that we pay insurance not only to protect us as drivers, but to protect all the other drivers. And so I think the same is true with the virus. We all need to be responsible for preserving our own health so that we can preserve the health of others. So we'll persist. We're excited for the university to open this fall with lots of social space, with lots and lots of masks and hand sanitizer, and some real strict rules about if you get into a contaminated area, what we're going to have to do to test and make sure that everyone remains healthy. So again, thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.